My son-in-law thought my warehouse held millions, but karma hit him hard. Be honest, Richard. That old lighthouse is just rotting money. Sign it over to me, and I'll turn it into something worth a fortune. He said it across my own dinner table, smiling, with my daughter's hand resting on his arm. He said it the way a man says something he's already decided is true, and I looked at the lighthouse my grandfather built with his own 2 hands, the one that had guided drowning men home for 60 years, and I understood something clear. To Marcus Reed it was nothing but a price tag he hadn't cashed yet. I didn't get angry. Something in me went still. A door closed somewhere deep, quiet as a latch in an empty house. I smiled back at him, passed the potato salad, and said, "It's not for sale, son." And in that stillness, I made a decision that would take me 6 months to finish, because here is what Marcus didn't know. He thought he was studying me. He thought the old man across the table was slow, sentimental, easy. He had no idea I'd already started building something he would walk straight into. He thought he was the hunter. If you ever had someone look at everything you built and see only what they could take from you, then you already know the silence I'm talking about. My name is Richard Hale. I'm 67 years old, and I live in a weathered grey house on the coast of Rockport, Maine, where the fog comes in so thick some mornings you can't see your own mailbox. I spent 31 years in the Coast Guard, most of them as a captain pulling people out of water that wanted to keep them. My hands still ache when a storm's coming. My old Ford pickup has more rust than paint, and I wouldn't trade it for anything with a warranty. I own a few stretches of shoreline, some cottages I rent to summer folks, and one small private island a mile out, with a lighthouse on it that hasn't burned a working lamp since 1981. People assume a man like me is rich. The truth is more complicated, and that complication nearly cost my daughter everything. My wife, Eleanor, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic. She went fast and she went brave. The last thing she asked me was to look after Olivia. Olivia is my only child. 34 now, with her mother's laugh and her mother's habit of believing the best about everyone. She makes a meatloaf almost exactly the way Eleanor did. The first time she made it after the funeral, I had to leave the kitchen so she wouldn't see my face. So when Olivia called 2 years ago, bright as a struck bell, to tell me she'd met someone, a real estate developer, charming, successful, polished, I made myself be glad. I'd promised Eleanor. And Marcus Reed was easy to be glad about at first. Firm handshake, good teeth, asked the right questions. Brought me a bottle of the bourbon I like and remembered I liked it. The kind of man who fills a room and lets you think it was your idea to let him in. They married within the year, on the bluff overlooking the water. I gave my daughter away with a full heart and a hairline crack in it I couldn't quite name. It was small, that crack. The way Marcus's eyes moved over my property at the reception, like an appraiser at an estate sale. The way he asked, casual as weather, whether the island deed was still in just my name. I told myself I was an old man inventing ghosts. Eleanor used to say I trusted slow and forgave slower, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt for a while. Then the questions started, and they had a pattern. Every Sunday dinner, between the green beans and the pie, Marcus would steer the talk to the same shore. Old deeds, mineral rights. Whether my grandfather had left anything behind out on that island. He'd laugh while he asked, but his eyes never laughed with him. And always, always, he circled back to the lighthouse. Why keep a worthless structure nobody uses, Richard? What are you really holding on to out there? I never answered. I'd just get quiet and pour the coffee, and every time I didn't answer I watched something flicker behind his face. Not curiosity, hunger. The look of a man who'd convinced himself there was a safe behind the painting, and the old fool guarding it didn't even know the combination. That was the first open question that started keeping me up at night. Why was a successful developer so obsessed with a crumbling lighthouse on a 1-acre rock? A man that rich doesn't beg for a ruin, unless he isn't as rich as everyone believes, unless he needs that ruin to be worth something. I didn't have proof. I just had a feeling, and a Coast Guard captain learns to trust the feeling that comes before the wave. So I started watching, not confronting. Watching, the way you watch weather on the horizon. I noticed Marcus had begun driving out to the coast on weekdays alone when Olivia thought he was at the office. My caretaker, Walt, mentioned a drone buzzing the island one afternoon, circling the lighthouse 3 times before it flew back toward the mainland. Then Walt told me someone had been asking the harbour men about the old tunnels under the keeper's quarters, offering cash for stories. Tunnels my grandfather dug during the war. Tunnels almost nobody alive remembered. And here was a man who'd been in my family 2 years asking strangers about them with money in his hand. That's when the stillness in me hardened into something with a spine. I drove into town, to a small office above the hardware store, and I hired a private investigator named Sarah Cross, a sharp, unhurried woman who done work for my old friend, Sheriff Tom Bennett. I slid a photograph of my smiling son-in-law across her desk. "I want to know who my daughter actually married," I said. "Take your time, be thorough. And here's the part I haven't told you yet. The part Marcus would have given anything to know. While he was out there flying drones and buying rumours, I wasn't sitting still. I'd already started laying something down out on that island. Something patient. Something that would only spring if a guilty man reached for it. 3 weeks later, Sarah Cross called and asked me to come to her office. Not email. Not phone. Come in. Bring nothing. When I sat down across from her, she set a thick folder on the desk, rested her hand flat on top of it, and looked at me with something careful in her eyes. "Captain Hale," she said quietly, "before I open this, are you sure you want to know everything? Because once you see what your son-in-law has been hiding, you can't unsee it. And it's worse than you think." I looked at that folder. I thought about Eleanor and my promise. I thought about my daughter's laugh. "Open it," I said. Sarah opened the folder, and the man my daughter married came apart page by page. Marcus Reed wasn't a successful developer. He was a drowning one. 3 luxury projects had failed in 4 years. Each one left a wake of furious investors behind it. There were lawsuits, people who'd handed him their savings and gotten back excuses. There were loans, the private kind that don't come from banks, with men attached to them who don't send polite reminders. And every one of those loans was coming due within months. But that wasn't the part that made the stillness in me go cold and clear as winter water. Sarah turned to the back of the folder, where she traced his history before Olivia. There had been another woman before my daughter, a widow in Connecticut with a late husband's estate, and before her, a family in Rhode Island with an inheritance. Marcus had a pattern, and the pattern was this. He found people with something to lose. He made himself impossible not to love. And then he reached for the thing they were holding. He hadn't married my daughter. He'd married a balance sheet he believed was hidden out on my island. I sat in that office a long time. I didn't shout. I didn't put my fist through the wall. I just got very, very quiet. The way the sea goes flat right before it decides what it's going to do. If you've ever learned something about a person that rearranges everything you thought you knew, then you understand. There's no anger big enough for it. There's only stillness. And the slow turning of a man making up his mind. Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you what happened next, because it's the whole reason I did it the way I did. My Olivia is a good woman. She loved that man with her whole open heart, the way her mother loved me. I could have stormed into their home and thrown the folder on the table, but you can't make a person stop loving someone by yelling. They have to see it. They have to watch the mask come off on its own. So I didn't go to Olivia. I protected her the only way that would hold. I let Marcus show her who he was. I let the rumours do the work. I never told a single lie. I just stopped correcting the stories the old harbour men loved to tell. Wartime valuables. Gold that came off a foundering ship in '44. Something my grandfather sealed under the lighthouse and never spoke of. I'd get quiet when it came up, and a guilty man reads quiet as confirmation. Within a month, Marcus was consumed. Sarah's people watched him pull property records, bribe a retired contractor for the old blueprints, and stand on the mainland shore at dusk, just staring out at that rock like a man in love with it. I waited 6 weeks. I wanted him to choose it freely, with both eyes open, so that no one could ever say I'd led him by the hand. And on a Thursday in October, with a storm climbing up the coast, my caretaker Walt called me. "Sir," he said, "he's here, on the island." And Richard, he brought excavators. I called Sheriff Tom Bennett, who'd been waiting on this call for 3 weeks. I called Sarah. Then I drove down to the water, and Walt ran me out through the chop while the rain came sideways and the old lighthouse stood black against a sky full of lightning. Marcus had cut through the security gate. He had 2 contractors and a small machine tearing at the foundation of the keeper's quarters, right where the old tunnel ran. He was soaked to the skin, hair plastered down, eyes bright in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. He didn't even hear us come up behind him. He was on his knees in the mud, pulling stones away with his bare hands, laughing. Every second of it was being recorded. The cameras I'd had Walt install months ago, the trespass, the cut gate, the destruction of property, all of it, clean and clear. Tom Bennett stood off to the side in the dark with his arms folded, just watching, letting the man finish digging his own grave. And then Marcus broke through to the sealed chamber. He went still the way a man does when a dream is about to become real. He turned on his flashlight and crawled inside. I followed him in. For a moment it was just the 2 of us in that cold underground room, the storm muffled above us. He swept the light across the chamber, expecting gold, expecting jewels, crates of cash, a fortune that would make every debt disappear. What the light found was boxes, hundreds of them, sealed against the damp, stacked floor to ceiling. "What is this?" he said. His hands were already tearing one open. Inside were letters. Hundreds of them, tied in faded ribbon, from men and women my grandfather and I had pulled out of the sea across 60 years. Thank you notes from people who'd lived because the light was on. Journals, photographs of crews, service medals, the folded record of every life this family had saved on that water. My grandfather started the room. I'd kept it going. It was the most valuable thing I owned, and there wasn't a dollar in it anywhere. I watched Marcus understand. I watched the colour drain out of his face in the flashlight glow, watched his hands begin to shake as the truth landed on him all at once, that he burned everything reaching for treasure that was never there, in front of cameras, with the sheriff standing in the rain above his head. "There's your fortune, son," I said, quiet as that first night at my dinner table. 60 years of it, every cent the sea ever gave us back. I came up out of that chamber into the rain, and Sarah Cross was waiting with the folder, and Olivia was waiting beside her. I hadn't planned that part. She'd grown suspicious on her own. A wife always knows the shape of a lie before she'll name it. She'd followed him out into the storm. She stood there in the lightning and listened to Sarah lay it all out. The debts, the lawsuits, the widow in Connecticut, the family in Rhode Island, the pattern she was only the latest line in. And I watched every strange question Marcus had ever asked rearrange itself in her eyes into something she could finally see whole. She didn't scream. "She's my daughter." She just looked at him a long moment. Then she looked at me. "Take me home, Dad," she said. That was all. That was everything. It came apart for him the way these things do, naturally, without my ever having to lift a hand. The trespass and destruction were a matter for Tom Bennett, and the courts. The investors he'd been dodging heard about the scandal and stopped waiting politely. His partners walked. The private loans came due and there was nothing to pay them with, because the fortune he'd staked his whole life on had never existed outside his own hunger. Olivia filed before Christmas. She's living back in Rockport now, 2 streets over. She made meatloaf last Sunday, and we both ended up laughing about nothing, and the crack in me finally healed clean. So here's what I know after all of it. Marcus crossed an ocean of lies searching for buried treasure. What he found instead was a room full of truth. Unlike gold, truth doesn't stay buried once it's been dug up. Generosity handed to a person who sees it as weakness will always be spent as permission. The quiet ones aren't slow. We're just patient. We're letting you show us who you are. If this story reached something in you, do me that kindness, hit like, and subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments, has someone in your life ever mistaken your kindness for something they were entitled to? I read them all, and if you know someone who needs to hear this tonight, send it their way. Somebody out there is being patient right now, holding their stillness, waiting for the light to come on. Let them know they're not alone.